Namaskar. A very good evening to you all. On behalf of the Indian Federation of University Women Association and President Dr. Ranjana Banerjee, I welcome the panelists, guests, members, friends, colleagues, and students to this webinar on Gender Implications of National Education Policy 2020. The discussion will be deliberated by two eminent scholars who have vast educational experience in English, economics, and gender studies. The IFUWA believes that members and participants must have an exposure to contemporary, significant, and meaningful programs related to life. We will commence our program by invoking the blessings of the goddess of learning, Saraswati. Sudha Devrani will present the Saraswati Vandana. I request all participants to kindly keep their videos and audios switched off to enjoy the meaningful deliberations. Thank you.
या कुंदेन्दु तुषार हार धवला या शुभ्र वस्त्रावृता या वीणा वरदंड मंडित करा या श्वेत पद्मासना या ब्रह्मा अच्युत शंकरा प्रभृतिभि देवै सदा वंदिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निशेष जाड्यापहा Om.
Thank you, Suraji. May the goddess Saraswati, on a throne of a white lotus, her countenance fair and radiant like the jasmine moon, with a necklace of pearls around her neck and the veena in her arms, dispel all ignorance and instill the illumination, empowerment via education for the emancipation of women, which is also the main focus area of the Indian Federation of University Women Associations, affiliated to its parent body, the Graduate Women International, based in Geneva, and its different affiliates all over India, known as the University Women's Associations. GWI believes education plays a positive role in building peaceful societies. I now invite Dr. Ranjana Banerjee, President IFUWA, for her address. She is an educationist and a focal area being gender studies, and her mission is to empower women through the equal platforms. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shweta. Good evening and welcome all of you to this evening's program. It was my long cherished dream to have both of you in this program, and I wish more and more participants join. Now, just to give you a very brief synoptic view of the educational ideals that the country is following and we are indebted to it, education is fundamental for achieving full human potential, developing an equitable and just society, and promoting national development. The collective effort of the policy framers and the academia has focused on revamping and restructuring a national system of education. Providing universal access to quality education is a prime duty of the government to foster leadership, economic growth, social justice and equality, scientific advancement, national integration, and cultural preservation. The aim must be for India to have an education system by 2040 with equitable access to the highest quality education for all learners, regardless of their socio-economic background. Universal high-quality education is a best way forward for developing and maximizing our country's rich talents and resources for good of the individual and the society. The pandemic period witnessed the much-awaited national education policy, followed by the announcement of National Curriculum Framework for Teacher Education and School Education. This National Education Policy 2020 is the first education policy of the 21st century and aims to address the many growing developmental imperatives of our country. This policy focuses, amidst many, the revision and revamping of all aspects of the education structure, including its revision and governance, to create a new system that is aligned with the aspiration and goals of the 21st century education. Education is not to be viewed as the deliverance of lessons, but an attempt to build up teacher-student relationship that will facilitate the development of skills and competencies in areas of communication, cooperation, teamwork, and resilience to stress, and so on, and excellence in application. Indian Federation of University Women's Association, with its primary mission of educating girls for empowerment, is indeed happy to organize a webinar on gender implications and NEP. The webinar is to realize that the policy must enable to examine the cultural and ideological bindings that influence the curriculum, which has its maximum impact and influence on the student's mind, shaping their thought processes. The teacher training focus will confirm good mentoring, impartial assessment, and monitoring students' all-round development. NEP is designed to bring the education system under one umbrella, promoting the idea right to equal education along with equal right to education. And this evening, we have two eminent speakers, Dr. Vibhuti Patel and Dr. Mukta Karmarkar, who will take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I request the participants again to mute themselves? Thank you so much. We have Dr. Vibhuti Patel with us, who is from the field of economics and a gender specialist. She has worked as professor, Advanced Center for Women Studies, School of Development Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She was awarded visiting fellowship to the London School of Economics and Political Science by the Association of Commonwealth Universities, UK. Currently, she is board member of School of Gender and Development Studies of Indira Gandhi Open University, the IGNOU. She has been member of expert committee on School of Gandhian Thoughts, board member of School of Extension of Women Studies of National Council of Education, Research and Training, the NCERT, Delhi, and expert committee member for Mission for Empowerment of Women in Science and Technology. She has many published reports, monographs, books, and over 100 papers to her credit, and is the recipient of awards such as the Upstanding Citizens Award and many more. Welcome to you, ma'am. Dr. Patel will present her deliberations and will be in conversation with Dr. Mukta A. Karmakar, Vice Principal and Head of the Department of English, Kaveri College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Pune, awarded with the Kaveri Award for Excellence in Education from the Kannada Sangha, Kaveri Group of Institutions, and a recipient of the Best Achievement Award by the Kannada Sangha Management. She has presented papers, moderated sessions, and even written a book on poetry. I now hand over the proceedings to our resource people and requesting all the participants to place their questions in the chat box with reference to whom it is particularly addressed. Over to you, both of you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shweta, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. Very good evening to everyone. And at the outset, let me thank Dr. Ranjana Banerjee, President IFUA, for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to get into conversation with none other than Dr. Vibhuti Patel, who's a much sought after speaker on gender studies, as well as gender implications and national education policy. So today we have come here together to understand the nitty-gritties of national education policy. And at the same time, we will also look at the gender implications and national education policy. That is, we will be focusing on both the things. And the format of the entire webinar is going to be a question and answer kind of a format, where I'll be asking certain questions which will be not just related to gender implications, but also from the point of view of higher education. So before I start with my questions, which I have around 9 to 10 questions from different sections. Before I do that, let me quickly take all of you through the background information of NEP so that all of us are on the same page and we have the similar kind of background information. Then we can go ahead. So please let me do that. The way, overseas as well as in India, it is said that education decides the future of a nation and destiny of its people. And national education policy also seeks to do the same. And it seeks to bring about a paradigm shift in the entire education system. And we are looking at the entire education system, the paradigm shift from the side of quantity versus quality. So from quantity, we are trying to go towards quality. So it has been almost 34 years. It has been already mentioned by Ranjana ma'am that it's been a long time. We haven't brought any kind of change in our education system in India. And because it is high time, we need to understand this. And that is why around July 2020, we brought about national education policy was unveiled after a very detailed consultative process at many levels. And the main aim of the entire national education policy was to make India a global knowledge superpower and transform India into a vibrant knowledge economy. So the policy aims to make both school as well as college education more holistic, flexible and multidisciplinary, which will suit to the needs of 21st century, because we know that the kind of needs which our young adults should have in the 21st century, we should look into it. And we cannot go by a very old education policy. We need to look into it, and that is why this particular policy was unveiled in July 2020. So once we understand what exactly is the aim, so if we go through all these chapters, we understand the main aim was to increase the public investment in education to 6% of India's GDP. So right now it is around 4.5, and why it is expected, because we wanted to improve education for nearly 300 million students in the country through setting out comprehensive reforms. So the kind of reforms which are expected in the next 20 to 22 years. So by the time this policy will reach higher education, it would be 2030, 31.
देखो
We will be
ये
rolling out. Sorry, is
हट
there
गया वहां
some?
से
Sorry, I'm getting disturbed.
आवाज आ रही वीडियो नहीं आ रहा आ गया
Can you please mute yourself? I think that is Mrs. O'Brien.
All of you mute yourself, please. The sound is coming in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the way the entire policy is going to come uh, around the higher education will be around 2030, and we will be rolling out the entire thing from 2022, uh, when we'll be celebrating 75th year of our independence. So because we are talking about the setting out this comprehensive reforms which will surely affect students from KG to PhD. So it's going to be in the very comprehensive manner. So one more very important thing about national education policy is we need to five fundamental pillars on which the entire policy is based. So to start with, access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. So today, while having a discussion with Dr. Patel, and we will be doing certain deliberations, all these aspects we will keep in mind, and we will go ahead with the questions in that way. Once I'm done with my questions, we will throw open the entire session for our participants as well. You can also get into the discussion and ask questions to Dr. Vibhuti Patel. So first of all, I welcome Vibhuti ma'am once again. And it is really good to have you here with all of us. And we are looking forward to your answers. So starting with a very fundamental question, I would like to take your attention towards the most fundamental question. And when we go through the entire NEP, we understand that national education policy recognizes the need of better teacher training and learning methods. At the same time, all these things are looked at, but it does not provide a way in which private institutions can raise funds to meet the needs of their students and their communities. So, Vibhuti ma'am, how to finance higher education? This is my first question to you, because if we really actually want to execute the NEP's dreams, we need to answer these questions. So how exactly to go ahead with financing higher education institutions?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Ranjana Banerjee and Dr. Mukta Karmakar, and also the organizers of this institute, and today's MC, Madam Shweta Talwar, and Vice President Gomti Venkateshwaran, and our own advocate Ghosh, who recommended my name. I think the question of financing higher education is extremely mind-boggling, because you know that in 2004, when Ambani Birla white paper was submitted to Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's office, they had said, and even the World Bank at that time, because of the neoliberal logic, they were saying that school education and primary education merits, it's a merit good. What is merit good? Where the state funds the education, it subsidizes heavily the education and infrastructure, as well as the student fees and everything. But higher education, you should leave it to the market. And that is a user fee. Those who are able to pay the user fee, they should be allowed to in this thing. Now, national education policy talks about the philanthro-public partnership. That means philanthropic institutions and the government should come together. But I think that's not going to solve the problem, because we have seen since 1991, if we go through the data provided by University MHRD this year, there are state-supported 399 universities. There are 126 deemed to be universities. We have 48 central universities and 334 private universities we have. Now, these universities, if we, and now the National Education Policy has opened up its doors for 200 foreign universities to set up their campuses in India. Now, it is in this context that the whole commercialization of education is happening in a big way. So, and especially for the professional colleges, professional education is become, even the middle class cannot afford, no? So the merit seats are so few. So whether it is engineering or management or even the law schools are very expensive. Then you have medicine, architecture, all these things are going to be, and the general courses of arts and commerce, they are losing their value. So I think state has to play a very proactive role. We have countries poorer than us, so many other Asian countries, even in the SAARC region, like Bangladesh has even moved ahead of us in human development. Sri Lanka, you see the amount of care and concern they have shown for the education. And it was the Nobel laureate Gunnar Myrdal, who had advised the Asian countries, the leaders of Asian countries, to invest in their workforce. They said, unless you have an educated and healthy workforce, you can't achieve high, because if you are talking about the 5 trillion economy, or if you are talking the double-digit growth, then you have to invest in human being. But that is a very instrumentalist approach, where you invest in the people and they return you high productivity and efficiency. But I think what we are talking about is a right-based approach, like Dr. Amartya Kumar Sen talked about that. If a person is a slow learner, won't you invest in that person? If a person is not able to, very weak and frail, won't you invest in education? Education becomes extremely important for a responsible citizenry. And I think that becomes the prime duty. And 2.8% is the investment in higher education. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which is heavily subsidized by and supported by the common people like you and me. All of us are paying 2% professional tax at source, and which is providing the financial backup to Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. And that's why we have seen suddenly, like since 2000, we have had Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Now all those kids who enrolled and were retained in school system, mainly because of so many backup services, improved infrastructure, computerization, midday meal programs. So one hot meal children from poverty groups used to get in the government and municipal schools. That was their provision of uniform, provision of textbooks, All these things created a situation where you have an aspiring class. According to Knowledge Commission, India needs 1,500 universities. And as I told you, we have 399 state-supported universities, another 299 private universities, and some are. So it is in this context that education needs top priority. And especially in today's last 9 months of experiences have shown, girls have paid the heaviest price of online education because of the digital divide. Only 10% of Indian students have accessibility to smartphone or a digital platform. So so state has to be extremely proactive, and it is a win-win formula. You are not doing a charity. It is a fundamental necessity of the knowledge economy.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, I would like to take the attention towards the fact which you have mentioned here, that around 100 plus foreign universities will be coming to India. And with this increased privatization of Indian higher education, we will lose the equitable growth. We are talking about equity here, and we might lose the equitable growth. Do you feel that in the drive of this privatization, women as students will be the main losers? Because as we know that equity is surely an important concern with respect to economy of higher education. So
Yeah.
what is your take on this?
I think, say, women are at the intersection of not only class, caste, race, religion, but also the question of patriarchal value system. So even we have seen, like since 1991, with privatization of higher education, we have seen increasing ghettoization of girls only in arts and commerce, which is heavily subsidized. Fees are very less, you don't have to pay. And even there, when you go to tier 2, tier 3 cities or a peri-urban areas, when I talk in such seminar, the girls would listen to me quietly during the seminar, but during tea break and lunch break, they say that their parents, these fees were paid by the teachers. Okay, their family had not paid the fees. That means higher education of girls is not even considered as a priority, even by the lower middle class and the poor. Okay, and the general belief, no, the popular saying that investing in a daughter is like a watering neighbor's plant. Okay, so because she's going to get married, she'll go to her in-laws place. In what way she is going to? So that kind of a belief when you have, then the affirmative action becomes very important because of the historical neglect. 5,000 years of patriarchal values which have not given level playing field to women. And you know that how much heroic battle in the 19th century social reformers had to fight. A person like Jyotiba Phule, Savitribai Phule, how much resistance there was against girls' education. No, now at least school education girls are given, and state also sees to it that through Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan all are enrolled, and main attraction is also midday meal and this. But otherwise, if you see the higher education, NAC report shows that since 1991, when it comes to professional education, girls' percentage is not very, very high. Only in the state supported, where the medical education is subsidized, fees are limited. This year itself, we have seen that in the NEET exam, so many girls have cleared, but they were given admission in a private university where they could not pay 4 or 5 or 6 lakhs of rupees. 3 girls committed suicide. They were the toppers. Even that girl in Chennai, Dalit girl in Chennai, she had 94% marks, and she could not afford to pay fees because the college which was given to her was demanding 4 lakhs rupees of fee yearly. They could not. So I think girls are going to pay very, very heavy price. Now, even among the middle class and those who can afford, we have seen that they would allow girls to go to college only for the marriage market. There is not a very encouraging environment for girls to take their career seriously. So even in that cases, we see that there is a very good study done by Karuna Chanana exhaustively that why girls are not encouraged to opt for STEM disciplines, science, technology, medicine, and and mathematics. They are systematically discouraged to opt for this kind of a thing. In fact, there is a whole long history also that any woman who took interest in science, technology, and mathematics and any abstract things, she was considered as a witches. From 13th century to 18th century, you read the history of witch killing in Europe. It was mainly, so that legacy is also there, that anything abstract is only the male prerogative, because they are the ones who have cognitive skills. Women are sentimental and emotional. That is the way. Even the classroom scenario, even in the classroom, the kind of tasks which are assigned to girl students, like in SNDT, so many extremely bright girls with extremely good record in co-ed education, they would come to SNDT, and they said, why? And these girls, they said that they have always remained in the shadow of boys. They were the monitors, they were the public speakers, they were the people who took decision. Well, their job was only recreation and registration, and that is the kind of this thing, or refreshment, which they were allowed to do. And they said it did not, they found it very humiliating. And here in SNDT, they got a level playing field, they got all the opportunities. So I think state has to be very, very proactive in creating this kind of a scenario. Recently, UNDP completed its 5 years of study of a Disha program. Disha program is especially to see to it that young adult girls, young adults, they get, they are job ready for the knowledge economy, for the future of work, and what the wave, the massive automation, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all that are entering Indian economy so fast, to prepare them for Skill India, Startup India, Make in India. And so that even after getting these skills, that girls faced so many hurdles in getting. So you have a degree, you have a training, but it doesn't get translated either into an enterprise or even startup. All the girls, they said, we are as competent. Even IIT graduates and double graduates are saying, we are as competent as our male counterpart. But the banks would not treat us as a credit worthy. None of the people would be able to fund very, very viable program for us. And we are told to do microfinance, no, like, or even any venture with 50,000 rupees or 1 lakh rupees. And that too, we have to collect from our relatives or friends, no? So it is under this kind of adverse circumstances that girls are striving. And we have seen that if you see the results of secondary school or even 12th HSC, you know, everywhere girls are toppers. Like in whichever universities I am giving webinar, the vice chancellor is saying that yes, the girls are, they are the toppers. But then why don't we create that kind of a congenial environment? Suddenly, like the girls who 100% enrollment you have at a primary school, why does it reduce to 24% by the time they complete the 12th standard? And how many of them are able to even enter university? Hardly 10 to 12%. So I think private sector is not going to do. Those who are working for profit are not going to do. It is only, even because we have seen even in CSR, corporate social responsibility, we have Fortune 500 companies. You see the studies, except for 3 or 4 foundations. One is Infosys Foundation or Tata Trust, Azim Premji Trust, and at the most Mahindra. Okay, which are the other Fortune 500 companies are ready to invest in higher education, not for profit, but for formation of, like, for human development? So that is a major challenge that we are facing. The state has to take proactive. Countries poorer than us have done it, and I think it is not, it's a question of political will, whether you want to invest in your 50% of your population. And there is a lot of criticism World Economic Forum has done about the way gender justice is absent in macroeconomic planning in our country.
So that means it looks like it will still take time for us to bring our girls to higher education, because the way you have mentioned just now that uh, by the time the girls reach higher education, 3 out of 4 girls drop out. So it's like 24.5% from 100%. So the enrollment of girls in primary education is said to be 100%. And from there, we are coming back to 24.5. So it seems there will be some time for us. Not even the national education policy will be able to bridge this gap. We will have to work more in this. My next question to you, ma'am, is about the plurality. That is, we as a country in India, we are very diverse nation, and we have so much of plurality in this nation. So do you think that the national education policy addresses this diversity, plurality, and the socio-economic disparities which are present in India?
Yeah, I think there are around 12 to 15 pages allocated to the question of plurality and how the special problems and special attention. So in principle, national education policy accepts that yes, we need to specially emphasize on those who have been underserved sections of society, like Dalit, tribal, people with physical disability, and even the gender sensitization they are talking about, that right from, that has to be the continuous process in whole education system. So that way it is said. But the problem is that what will be the, how are you going to, what kind of structures and mechanisms that you are going to create? There comes the major this thing, that if meritocracy or elitism, both of them are not going to allow any opportunity to the underserved people, because those who don't come from the background, like there is a who don't know such support system, like no, if the first generation learners, they, lot of hand holding is required, because I remember in TIS is also so many support systems and bridge courses and special English classes and one-to-one teaching, and these kind of support systems are required, and I think many countries have it. So it's a question of whether we allocate funds, functions, and functionaries. So these three are extremely important to, because otherwise it will remain a platitude. It will be there on paper in the policy, but for implementation, we need to come out with a very high social sector budget, and also the coming out with the schemes and programs which are specifically designed to address the special needs of different people, like people in the tribal areas, or people who are constantly moving, like the denotified tribe, those who are gypsies, all these sections who are currently underserved, they are the ones, their children are the ones who need to be mainstream into the education process.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, from here, I would like to take your attention towards the administrators, those who are taking care of colleges. So, what do you think are the affirmative actions that could be taken to boost women's access and participation in higher education? Because we are not able to see many women principal or many women directors in higher education. So, what is your take on this? And
Yeah.
what are the affirmative actions that we should take so that we will be able to boost women's access into these things also?
I think in terms of first affirmative action that India took was in 1976 with the Equal Remuneration Act, which talks about equal opportunity at the time of entry, equal treatment when you are working in any workplace, and also equal rewards for the work that you do. And I think individually several women after 1975 have used this law, but it is a very long drawn, painful struggle, like as we saw in case of Audrey Ribeiro, or even so many women teachers, senior most teachers in the college, who were not elevated as a principal because the management thought that how can they trust 6,000, 8,000, 12,000 students to a woman principal. That was the scenario some 30 years back. Now we see that at least in a mega cities, or and especially after 91, when the privatization of higher education started happening, and even school education started happening, some of the very so many decision makers in higher education, they switched to the private institutions, and the vacancy was created. So we saw in so many medical colleges, school of architect, professional colleges, and also in universities, slowly and gradually women came, they were appointed, or they were elected as deans, or non-teaching people, they were the superintendents or principal of colleges, because the more opportunities for men, and private universities and private colleges, they were charging very high fees, and they were also giving more salary. Like I remember in Bombay after 91, so many, like all the 4 medical colleges, most of the senior teachers. So Dr. Suchitra Roy, please mute. Dr. Suchitra Roy, please mute your. Yeah, please mute yours. Okay. So we are getting disturbed. Okay. So we saw that there was a major exodus of the senior teachers to these private universities, which were paying them 3 to 4 times more salary. And that was the time when we saw women elevated in the public sector of the higher education. That is the one. Another very important initiative when Dr. Armaiti Desai, when she became a chairperson of UGC, she started a very important program mission in the UGC. And she herself being a chairperson of UGC, she said that she was at the wall, such a strong uh, patriarchal wall, and she was banging her head to get women in the leadership role. And she started this program called Women Managers in Higher Education. So picking up teachers who are dedicated to the mission of education and training them in education administration and take decision at a macro level, at a university level, at a college level. So because in the educational as a profession, teaching is the considered to be lowest. In fact, people laugh at me that I continue teaching because, and I have a passion for teaching, but it is considered as a babysitting. You are with the children, no? Like, while if you are a dean, or if you are a HOD, or if you are registrar, deputy registrar, BOS chairperson, then you have administrative control. So women earlier would join the university higher education system and retire at the same position. Now the things are changing because women themselves are also very, they know that they are competent, and they have a new confidence that and they aspire for promotion. So at aspirational level also we see that change. And also UGC has also taken initiative. In fact, nearly for 20 years we had that program. Intensive 6 weeks training was given to groom women to take a decision-making position. But still we hardly see 10, 12 universities out of 400 UGC-supported universities where you have a women decision makers. No?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for this insightful talk, ma'am. And yes, you are quite right in saying that women should be elevated in higher education. We should not be looked at as teachers as if we are babysitting. Even teaching is not easy at
Not
all.
easy, correct.
So, and one more point which you made is yes, we need to get training. Training is very important because as administrators, we need to know how to take decisions, how to go about it. So I'm very hopeful that maybe national education policy will bring about this kind of a change where slowly and steadily we will be able to see women as administrators, women in the leading positions, even at higher education level. So my second question to you, ma'am, is about the affiliation system. And in the national education policy, you have seen this, that it suggests a four-pronged approach to do away with the entire affiliation system, which according to me, I feel is a very innovative concept, I think. And because it has been observed that the affiliation system in a way is flawed, and it is also one of the major reasons because of which Indian universities are failing to find a place in the global ranking. So what is your take on this, ma'am, that doing away with the affiliation system, whether it is a good move or it will still take time for us?
No, it just talks about the cluster approach, that if there is a lead college, and one thing in principle I agree that if you some colleges have a best teacher, okay, science teacher or teacher in literature or teacher in social science or humanities, why should only that particular college benefit? So I think cluster approach is very good instead of affiliation where it's only bureaucratic thing and only just checking the muster, that kind of approach, as compared to that focusing on the quality of education and also benefits of the best educational endeavor or the knowledge construction should reach everyone, not only that. And I think rural colleges and all, because most of them are affiliated colleges, they are, majority of them are in the rural and peri-urban areas, and the gap between, knowledge gap between those colleges, students and teachers of those colleges, and those who have a benefit in being in city where you have a good information system, very good library, you have a whole legacy of 3 or 4 generations of educational investment. So I think that gap that needs to be breached. So that is very important. The corruption in the affiliation system that you have, no, the kind of bureaucratic maneuvering, manipulation that takes place, I think doing away with that is very important, and focusing on knowledge construction, exchange of ideas, and also creating a very intellectually vibrant environment That is very, very important, and that has to happen. But one thing we need to understand is that the inequality in knowledge resources, that people in Bombay, we get everything without having to ask for it, while there are colleges in even in the most industrialized state like Maharashtra, 35% of the villages don't even have electricity. So this kind of unevenness that we have, so there should be more empathy. So even whenever I went for NAC visit, I was always doing hand holding. I was not doing policing. Other members would just lambast the principal and this thing that they don't have this, they don't have that. In Bombay we have this, in Delhi we have this. That kind of a conversation they had. Instead, I ended up doing more support because I know under so many adverse circumstances they were running the college, no, in the tribal areas or in the rural areas or in a deep forest. There would be one college where the students from 42 hamlets and they were coming, they had to walk for 4 or 5 kilometers in the deep forest to reach the college. So this inequality in the knowledge resources and infrastructural resources, I think we have to be very, very empathetic. And that's why there should be more exchange and more, India should not exploit Bharat. So I think that's what in short we can say.
Superbly said, ma'am. India should not exploit Bharat. Absolutely. And I feel that the point which you have made about the unevenness of knowledge resources, we need to really look into it, because even if we do away with the affiliation system, we need to look after the rural part of India. That if these cluster colleges could be could be taken in such a manner that rural part also gets the same kind of benefit which the urban is getting. I would like to take up one question which is asked here by, I think, Mrs. Mahajan. So you have already talked about the ghettoizing of the girls in general higher education like arts and commerce. So, Dr. Just a moment.
Mrs.
It is a
Mahajan,
question.
yeah.
Mrs. Mahajan. Mrs. Mahajan is asking a very pertinent question, and even this was there in my mind, that though the policy envisages a broad-based, multidisciplinary, holistic education at the undergrad
Yeah.
level, and we know that it is the need of the hour, as it will create well-rounded individuals. So I want to ask you that what changes do you think we will have to bring about in our mindset so that our girls will also start getting into STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields
Yeah.
instead of arts and commerce?
Yeah, I think first of all, even in Parent Teachers Association, PTA meetings also we need to discuss that they have to do a lot of encourage the girls to go for up, because in a very early childhood only, if she is not allowed to nurture the dreams of having a career, she will always think in terms of only like very functional education that she gets. Teachers also, I think in the classroom teaching also, I think teachers have to special attention, and girls and encourage them to take the STEM subject. In my school, it was supposed to be elite school of Baroda, but it was compulsory for all girls to go for tailoring and boys to go for technology. And I think it is still there. It is still there in a very, very big way. I'm talking of 70s, yeah, 60s when I was in school. So even the girls who were interested in technology or who were interested in carpentry, plumber, fitter, and they were not allowed. They had to do. So I think this kind of segregation of streams at a primary level, that should stop. Even in the kind of roles which they are given, like whenever it comes to debate and discussion and this thing, it would be boy would be assigned this kind of role. And when it came to cultural program or singing prayer, it would always be chosen. That also I personally experienced, that always they were good. So this division of labor, even within the school system and in the classroom situation, that happens, that also needs to be done away with. In fact, in Bombay, there is a very good organization called Avehi and Abacus, and they are the ones who work in the community and generate interest in demystify science. There is nothing so great about physics, chemistry, botany, and zoology. If you have a good teacher, it's on the responsibility of the teacher to make or break the spirit of a student. And if teachers have this gender stereotypes, like there was a very important study Vacha had done, Vacha and organization called Setu in Ahmedabad had done, the classroom scenario, most of the time girls in municipal school in Mumbai, they were asked to only do teachers work. Teacher would doing embroidery and teacher would ask them to clean vegetables, and 2-3 times they had to sweep the floor. And they said, in any case, you people can never understand. If this kind of prejudices in the public, like in the government supported schools you have, what happened? And then after that, Sri Mukti Sangatna is another organization. They started a science and maths education program called Jigyasa, Curiosity. And they came out with such a good method, playway method, various types of simulation and exercises that they gave. And children developed interest in mathematics, STEM subjects, no? And so many of them, even from the deprived sections of society, they opted for science. So it is very, and we have a very strong legacy. We have a Lilavati's daughter, and our Indian scientist, she also got an award last week, no? Bhaskaracharya, mathematician, the way he taught his daughter mathematics, I think we need to come up with a more creative way of teaching the STEM subjects. It's not only rote learning is not going to help them. You have to have more and more experiential learning. And I think there are certain experiments made by, see, Dr. Jayant Nardikar, like Prakriti. He started the institution called Prakriti and started the young minds, young adults. He started inducting them into not only abstract science, but also practical science, no? That how physics was linked to making of certain instruments, how mathematics was helpful in doing certain planning in a more scientific way. So that way, like the experiential learning also helps. So I think we need to come up with a more creative way of imparting education to girls, and also get out of the gender stereotype, no? About that women, the girls cannot handle the abstract subject. Their cognitive skills, they are more sentimental, and they can only be okay with the fine arts and humanities and this thing, no? Social and only arts degree they can manage. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I feel after you have thrown some light on the fact that it is our responsibility as a society to give this kind of a push. So all the stakeholders, in fact, parents, teachers, or maybe peers, all these will have to bring about that kind of a change, with the help of which our girls will also feel confident enough to take up STEM subjects, and they'll not be relegated. I'll not say relegated. I'm also an art student, but we should, because otherwise how exactly we will be going ahead in research. So I will take my next question, which is about research. And now, as NEP, and there is a proposed NRF also, that is National Research Foundation. So what do you think, ma'am, that whether NEP and this NRF will help embed research and innovation in young minds, and will it help students to develop scientific temper? Because when we are able to see here that we as a country, we have only 0.3% of global contribution when it comes to patent output. So China and US are way ahead of us. So what do you think, by this kind of a move, by creating this separate NRF, do you feel that this kind of embed we will be able to embed both research and innovation in young minds, and we will be able to come out with more number of patents from India?
I think first NRF, now everyone has to bid, because now you can't use your influence, or you can't it is not that just because you are in a college or university and your principal or vice chancellor roots your proposal, it will reach you. Just now there will be open bidding, the way we bid for the international research projects or multi-centric research projects globally. So I think there'll be more competition under National Research Foundation. They are not going to do away with ICSSR. So Indian Council of Social Science Research will remain as a pivotal institution. But otherwise, for all the researches, you will be facing tremendous competition. So it will ensure, if there is no interference, there is no bureaucratic or political interference, if you just go by the content and by what the proposal promises, and what has been the record of the research team, because now they are also talking about not only interdisciplinary research, but the transdisciplinary research that also that has started. So I think in a way it's a good move, and even the research funding that would be also, they will source funding also from the private sector. So both it will also have its own corpus for this funding, and there will be a lot of the model is that of a community college model, where what the community requires, if your research proposal is esoteric and it doesn't promise that it will deliver something for the global for the maximum good for maximum people, then there are less chances for the proposal to be accepted. Your research has to deliver in terms of societal contribution. No? So that is also another thing which they have been asked for.
So let us hope for such an India where we will be also able to come out with many patents the way US and China is doing. So one last question from my side, ma'am, and then we will take up the questions which are put forth by our participants here. So my last question is basically on your studies, that is gender studies. So at one hand, the policy emphasizes that India should also take the lead in preparing professionals in cutting edge technology or cutting edge areas that are fast growing prominence, such
And
as
India is
AI
also
or such
like
as 3D machine learning.
machinery, yeah, and
So
also knowledge
my
economy. No,
question,
it talks about the
yes,
knowledge economy also. Yeah.
right. So, let's take the knowledge economy first, ma'am, because even I would like to know from you that what exactly are the four pillars of knowledge economy, because the entire thing is based on knowledge economy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in one of his speeches on NEP, he surely mentioned this, that we would like to grow in our knowledge economy. And I would like to know from you, what are these four pillars of knowledge economy? And then I'll come to my last question.
So I think the knowledge economy is the one that utilizes knowledge to develop and sustain long-term economic growth, and also knowledge economy framework focuses on four pillars, which it suggests are needed to support the successful knowledge economy. And there may be a case for maintaining or even increasing spending on higher education if you go by the demands or by the knowledge economy. And the national education policy, which also talks about the public philanthropic partnership initiative in higher education, is quite relevant for the knowledge economy framework. And first pillar of knowledge economy is a very important economic and institutional regime that is conducive to creation, diffusion, and utilization of knowledge. A regime that provides incentives that encourage the use and allocation of existing new knowledge and efficiently with the help of foster policy change. So I think the national education policy is fostering many the policy changes. The economic environment must have a good policies and also favorable to market transactions, such as being open to free trade and foreign direct investment. So India inviting the four new internationalization of higher education that India has done over last 10 years. So many state governments have come up with their own laws, and also there are four bills are still there in the parliament about internationalization, and the national education policy has also recommended that the best universities in the world, they should have their campuses here. So that is there. And government should protect the property rights to encourage entrepreneurship and knowledge investment. So whatever knowledge is generated, that should be used to support the enterprise. So turning to industry, collaborating with industry and corporate world, that is demanded. The second pillar of knowledge economy is a well-educated and skilled population that creates and shares and uses knowledge efficiently. Education, especially in a scientific and engineering fields, is necessary to achieve technological growth. So currently we are talking of future of economy in which there is a massive automation and machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotics in manufacturing sector. So our workforce has to be ready for that. A more educated society tends to be more technologically sophisticated, and it generates the higher demand for knowledge. The third pillar of knowledge economy is a dynamic information infrastructure that facilitates communication, dissemination, and processing of information and technology. So more and more democratization of the knowledge output. So it is, so you have massive open online sources, platform-based knowledge resources. So increased flow of information and knowledge worldwide reduces transaction cost, because earlier, like we even to get one particular book or one article, how much effort we had to make. Now you can easily download them. So greater communication, which would result in greater productivity and greater output. The fourth pillar of knowledge economy is an efficient innovation system of firms, of research centers, think tanks, universities, consultants, and also organizations, civil society organization that applies and adapts global knowledge to local needs to create new technology. So you have to make appropriate technologies, whatever may be very effective in a Western country may not be so effective. We will have to mold that according to our requirement. Generation of technical knowledge leads to productivity growth. And the new buzzword that we have, Industry 4.0, we are talking about, that is a completely use of artificial learning and robotics. So the future of work is marked by heavy use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics in the economy. So these are the four pillars which are intertwined with each other. They are interconnected and they are interdependent. So you need to have all these four. First of all, economic and institutional regime, which is conducive to knowledge economy, educated workforce, innovative and mind and critical reflection, and how to adapt the knowledge according to your particular specific situation, and very efficient information infrastructure. So knowledge
Thank you
economy
so much,
framework
ma'am.
suggests that to be effective in knowledge economies, knowledge is created, disseminated, and used well. And policy advice would focus attention of which pillar are in need. And in terms of appropriate policies, institutions, investment, coordination is done. An ecosystem that encourages innovation, critical reflection, and research. These are the hallmark of knowledge economy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for explaining in such an elaborate manner what exactly knowledge economy is and what are the four pillars, because I'm sure NEP is seen as a major step towards making India a knowledge economy. And if we understand what exactly these four pillars are, we will be able to implement and execute what all is expected from us as educators and what all is written in NEP. So my last question, the way you have already said about the third pillar of knowledge economy, where we have talked about AI, 3D machine learning. So in this NEP, we have seen that somewhere there is a lot of impetus given to take these subjects ahead, these topics, by weaving these kind of subjects in the undergrad level. But nowhere the policy talks about women's studies as a discipline. So Dr. Patel, how do you explain this invisibilization of the mention of women's studies
Yeah.
in NEP?
So I think it is a matter of deep regret that women's studies, which has played a very important role in last 40 years. It was in 1975 and the 1974 where the Towards Equality report was discussed in the parliament. In the post-independence period, there was a first serious discussion on this report. And when first research unit was started by SNDT Women's University, and when the Vice Chancellor of SNDT Women's University became a UGC chairperson, Dr. Madhuri Shah, she sent a GR to all universities to start Women's Studies Center. So right from 1974 to 2021, we currently, like, there are 80 Women's Studies Centers functioning in because in last 10 years, there were 144 Women's Studies Centers supported by UGC. UGC stopped funding to Women's Studies Center, and so many universities, they had no they did not have any salary, so there was a massive retrenchment took place. But women's studies has played a very important role in mainstreaming gender within the mainstream disciplines. There are so many the universities which have started foundation course, Women in Changing India, and preparing changing the mindset of students towards gender justice and gender equality, empowerment of women, and also making them more gender responsive. Then we have so many research reports, we have textbooks, we have undergraduate courses. So many universities have introduced gender and women's studies at undergraduate level. In postgraduate level, every discipline has paper. If you are literature, then you have a feminist literary criticism. In economics, we have economics of gender and development, in sociology of women, you have a psychology of women, gender in history. So there was a massive effort that the women's studies as a discipline has made, and still it is not given a disciplinary status. So many, they have an MA program, PhD program, and MPhil program, but national education policy has talked about gender sensitization, but it has not talked about the role of Women's Studies Center. And Women's Studies Centers in terms of 5 important activities: construction of new knowledge, identifying the sexist and biases and gender stereotypes in the existing education, existing discipline, doing the original research in the Indian context, doing the documentation, archives, like just now ma'am was asking, it is the centenary year of Hansa Mehta. Now, who has collected all the material, archival material in regional languages in English? It is the Women's Studies Center, the archives. You have Avabai Vadia archives in SNDT. You have a Genvar.gen archives in Center for Women's Development Studies. You have a Sparrow archives. You have a Prajna archives in Chennai, Sparrow CS Lakshmi's archive. So this is the kind of, with the missionary zeal, with the total commitment at a paltry honorarium, these women have done so much of work. They have come up with the training module for gender sensitization of police and judiciary and politicians and Panchayati Raj institutions. And they have also taken stand, because this is the only discipline which is not ivory tower discipline. It doesn't believe in maintaining academic distance from the reality. They are also changing the reality. It has a tremendous transformative potential, and not mentioning women's studies in the national education policy. I think that, and we have a very throbbing, intellectually dynamic organization called Indian Association for Women's Studies, which has existed right from 1981, and currently also it is very, very active.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. I would like to take up now some questions which are there from our participants, and these are in the chat box. So there's one question from Mrs. Malati Kalmari,
Yes.
and she's asked, can a rural college and an urban college become a cluster?
Yeah, why not? Yes, they can, because in terms of laboratory, in terms of playgrounds, in terms of R&D, in terms of highly sophisticated libraries, if the urban college is far more endowed in terms of infrastructure, then why should rural college be deprived? If they are in cluster, they can do teacher exchange, they can do student exchange, they can do urban-rural exchange in terms of research, collaborative research. And also with the information technology base, they can have various webinars and workshops and training modules, and they can be part of the knowledge system. So it's very important, because the current gap between the rural colleges which are affiliated and the colleges which are in the urban center, there is an extremely high gap, and then they lose out also, because they may be good in wherever the rote learning is required. You may have, and plus limited library, limited number of teachers, and limited resources, that also deprive them of so many new things that are happening in the knowledge economy.
So it is very much possible.
Yeah.
So there's one more question from Dr. Ranjana Banerjee. She asks, does the NEP have any system to identify meritorious girls in rural areas?
Yeah, correct. That it talks about, because when it talks about this thing, special handholding, and currently also we have Kasturba Gandhi Vidyalaya, where the meritorious girls are picked up from the rural areas, tribal areas, and are given intensive, they are isolated and they are given intensive training, so that they can also be ready to become IAS officers, IFS officers. In fact, in the so many states, like in Gujarat, 60% of forest officers are women. Okay, so, and they have cleared the exam, because main thing, you have to clear the state competitive exam, and many so the kind of facilities they get in terms of library, special coaching, student teacher ratio is also favorable to student. Teacher is able to give time. These children are also very focused, and I think Bertrand Russell's philosophy, that the meritorious students should be isolated, and they should be given far more challenging assignments, because they get bored very fast if it is very mediocre type of a thing. So I think that currently also is happening, with the special schemes you have in the Ministry of Women and Child Development. But the focus of this thing is also on the how to create merit, how to create congenial environment for the meritorious students. It talks about.
Thank you so much, ma'am. If there's any question from the participants, either you can unmute yourself or otherwise you can type in the chat box. I'll take up your questions.
Sumita Roy, yeah. I think she wants to speak, yeah. Hello? Yeah, she has unmuted. Study, what is it?
Till then, I'll take up one more question, which is asked by Dr. Vandana Parashar. She
Uh-huh.
asks, Dr. Patel, is there any focus on sports for girl students in new education policy?
That is a major criticism. Sports, they have said in this, but problem is that what is the allocation? Because currently, if we see the gender economists have done the dissection of the budgetary allocation, the unit cost for sports budget for girls is 12 rupees. What do you get in 12 rupees? You can't get even one pound vada. Okay. While the unit cost for sports men is 200 rupees. All the stadium, hostels, best trainers, everything is directed to boys. So there is a sports is a one department where there is a misogyny and extreme this. In fact, the gold medalists, silver medalists, bronze medalists, when they stay in the hostel, they are only made to cook or clean those campuses and all. No, nobody even trains them. So all those who have got Olympic this thing, no prizes and all, it is their own parents and their family members who have invested in them in terms of training, in terms of special diet that they require and all. But I think the sports ministry needs, in fact, state commissions for women and national commission for women. They are inundated with so many complaints and the grievances of sports women and there is sexism is very, very high as compared to many other ministry in the space, because sports and recreation is considered to be the male prerogative. That is the age-old way of looking at procreation for women and recreation for men. So sports comes under recreation. So women should be happily married and produce babies. That is the kind of mindset still we have at an operational level, no? So
That's right.
yeah.
There's one more question from Sara Pamela. She asks, studying for medicine is very expensive. Are there women's organizations that can help girls to take up such courses?
I think the scholarship system, scholarship for this kind of expensive education, I have not come across, but mostly there are foundations have given, like Tata Trust and all they give. But women's organizations, they are supporting like a nominal, the government college fees, no? Their capacity to fund this kind of education is very limited. And I think the only way for more and more women to join medical and other professional courses is that the state has to subsidize it. If a tiny little country like Cuba can do it, why can't we do with our kind of resources we have? And even the corporates should be 2% of profit, which they have to use for philanthropic work. I think they need to subsidize professional education for girls. It's very, very important, and we need to lobby through such platform. We have to create the public opinion in favor of that.
Thank you so much. So are there any other questions from the participants?
I had sent up a chat message.
Yeah.
It's not a question so much
Yeah.
as bringing to highlight Telangana state has taken the initiative to look into the area for the underprivileged or perhaps even the tribal areas to support young girls where they see some spark or some good potential, because we have this 13-year-old girl from Telangana who has climbed Mount Everest last November. And then the two girls also from Telangana who have been trained to work on high tension cables and wires, which was only the prerogative of men because it is a hazardous job. And we see that. So unless state governments really do this kind of breaking the glass ceiling, I don't know whether the vast country like India can come forward in spite of this tremendous new education policy, which can make great changes in our country.
Yeah, I
You know,
think
if I can just pitch in, going forward with Gomati's views, the state, the center, the national education policy, everything is in place. But I also strongly feel, I do not know whether Dr. Patel will agree with me or not,
hmm,
is the parents and the family members must motivate their girl child for higher education. We are
that is
doing
true.
it a lot. We
Yeah,
have really progressed in the field of women's education. Even then, there are areas and pockets where there is still resistance in promoting the girls, especially in areas of sports or for STEM.
yeah, that we
Mukta,
have
I
seen.
think that can bring an end to this program.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
is,
can I please ask one question?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, considering the dismal status of women's education, I think more awareness should be created in different forums so that there are many who can afford and support women's education at personal level. That will also, in totality, will help to improve the level of women's education.
And also, I think in the textbooks also, with the gender stereotypes will have to go right from mathematics, where you teach that father is earning 8,000 rupees and mother is spending 6,000 rupees. What will be the amount left over? You are promoting the gender stereotype. Father is a breadwinner, a woman is just a sponge on his salary. No, so I
Even
think
the
more and more
illustrations in
active
the textbooks.
textbook illustrations as well as the text, so that girls start aspiring role models. Who are the new role models? Because we have, like, NGOs and women's groups have come up with the literature about women achievers and all, but how many textbooks are reflecting that? No. So I think we need to have a, so that girls also start aspiring to become scientist or doctor or this thing. Like, I like the initiative with the Panchayati Raj institutions in Maharashtra took. Like, they prevailed upon Home Minister to stop bar dancing. They said, we don't want 94 in 10 years time. Maharashtra had a 94,000 girls from rural areas dancing in the bar to Bollywood number in skimpy clothes. And it was the women elected representatives of Panchayati Raj institution. They said, we don't think that only your children have right to become achieve something in life and become doctor and engineer and lawyer and teacher. Why can't our daughters? Why should our daughters give up their studies from 7th and 8th and 9th standard? So many girls used to go even the school uniform to the bar. After that, they would change dance at midnight. They would go. So I think even given the opportunity, given the level playing field, and given the decision making power, women are supporting. And I think individually also we have seen when the women are achieving local, there are so many Panchayati Raj institution, Gram Sabhas and all, they have also supported. Villages have contributed. If the some girl achieves, or Mandeshi Mahila Sakari Mandi, the Chetna Galas organization, from zero literacy to now girls are doing MBA, because they created that kind of atmosphere. It's a rural women's corpus which they created in this cooperative, this thing. They collaborated with the Yale University and Harvard Business School for the rural MBA. So after 12th standard in Marathi medium, you can also do your BBA and then MBA. So I think there have been all three levels it's happening. One at state, as you said, that Kasturba Gandhi Avasiya school, Shada, that means Kasturba Gandhi residential school, where, as you said, that any tribal girl or a girl from underserved community, if she's bright in her the results, she's picked up and taken to this school where intensive education is given. Another this thing is the people in the community, they also come forward, and elected representatives, like so many MP, member of parliament area development fund, there each member of parliament is given 5 crore rupees. So even from that, for educational purpose, they can use it. So for sports, like some of them have used their MP fund for creating either a playground, or providing equipments, or giving a special diet with that sports person needs. So I think once we start verbalizing and start demanding, then it happens. If we just silently suffer, it will not happen. We will have to vocalize. We will have to amplify the voices of all those whose demands have not been met. Then I think we can change the scenario. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Patel, for your priceless and elaborate insights on NEP and gender implications and national education policy. And it was indeed my pleasure, as well as our pleasure, to listen to you. And at the same time, I thank all the participants also for their contribution to this entire program and this entire webinar. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's webinar. And over to you, Ms. Talwar, for the next proceeding.
Yeah. There is only one question in chat box, which just now, that is NEP trying to collaborate with the financial institution? I think the record of financial institutions is so predatory when you see the way they are treating small self-help groups or the microfinance institutions or even the nationalized institution, for the way they are fleecing people. I don't think that they would be in any way would be supporting such endeavor. One, I have not come across the financial institutions. They're currently only talking about profit, profit, and more profit. So that is there. So it is basically that CSR activity within
But then,
that 2%.
yeah, but then I think it is difficult to promote entrepreneurship, because I know many women who wants to start the business. They have management skills, they have worked in corporate, but they don't have that much funds to
But they
invest.
don't give, no. Only 9% of
Yes.
entrepreneurs are women. Even within
That's
that
true.
kind of entrepreneurship they have is a 50,000 investment, from 5,000 investment, 20,000 investment, 1 lakh investment, pawning their gold and getting 2 lakhs to start business. None of the banks are helping them. All of
That's
them are
why.
crying that they are not even considered. Even BTech and MTech girls, when they give proposal for startup, they will not be given because they are not considered as credit worthy. The bias in the financial institutions, male bias, is so strong. So I think unless you make it mandatory the way they made it, no, that 2% of profit should go for CSR. Similarly, within that, let us ask for women component. The way you have a scheduled caste component, the way you have a tribal sub-plan for the tribal people, same thing, you have a women's component. Ninth five-year plan had talked about it, that in any anti-poverty program, 30% of the benefits should go to women. Any Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, when it initially education for all was the approach, all the boys, they were in school and their sisters had taken over as child labor. It was only when the women's component came that minimum 30% in the school have to be girls. And if in one particular school there are no girls, then they are accountable. They have to ask that what are the reasons why girls are not in the school, why they are only working in the field and they are child workers. No, currently, just day before yesterday, Government of India has given GR to all the schools. 1 crore girls are out of school during the lockdown. Okay. Now, how to bring back those girls? Because nation is losing out. One whole generation of girls, if they are not educated, whatever we earned in last 150 years of social reform movement, we are turning the wheels of history in a backward direction. So I think affirmative action, the state has to make it mandatory for the financial institution for the social sector concerns, no, that women entrepreneurs and their proposals, if their proposals are economically viable, there is no reason for rejecting their proposals.
There is one more thing, Dr. Patel. If you see earlier policies also, we always, expected industry to come forward, and, it should be an education and industry partnership, to train in terms of apprenticeship or, any other matter that they can, train the students. But there are no guidelines, by the different ministries that how, to, and especially in the case of women.
Yeah.
So is there,
So the only guidelines you have is about the gender responsive budgeting. In that, there are guidelines that 5 areas: education, employment, decision making, violence, and health. These are the 5 areas where gender gap is extremely wide, and what kind of allocation you would make for gender responsive budgeting. So that is a broad guideline that you have. SEBI gave a directive that anyone who doesn't promote the gender diversity policy within Fortune 500 companies, no, they would be fined 25 lakhs rupees. And imagine only 12 companies have implemented gender diversity policy. Here it is not only men and women, but even transgender people. So they don't mind paying fine of 25 lakhs to SEBI but they will not implement. So this is the power of patriarchy, that. So I think we have to really long way to go. It is a
I hope
work in progress. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So
is
as you
work in
mentioned that
progress.
in gender sensitization, we may be able to, prepare our boys or our
Uh,
sons
it
to, towards a more equal society. I hope
Correct.
so.
Yeah. So, and that's why the recent change we see in Africa is mainly because these young boys who the dictators who sent away their sons to European university where they learned the women's studies as a subject. After learning, when they went back to the respective countries, they brought the change. No? So I think
Yes.
the whole
Let's hope.
sensitization has to happen at a very, very young age, very, very young, right from preschool. It has to happen.
Very nice. Very good discussion.
Yeah.
Shweta,
Yes, ma'am.
come in.
Thank you,
Excellent
Dr.
discussion.
Patel. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Karmakar, for this wonderful discussion. It was very, very informative, and we have gained a lot of knowledge. Yes, the gender stereotypes, the patriarchal walls, they all need to be broken down. I really think that too. The government of the policy 2020, the government, we have wait for the while we wait for its full implications, especially for gender and the SDGs of the United Nations. We are still waiting for the implications and to see how we move forward with that. What does GWI say regarding education? Recover, revitalize education for the COVID-19 generation. The GWI advocates on this. As the digital divide increased during the COVID-19 period, distance learning was a major solution towards equal and inclusive access to education. The SDG 17 on the power of partnerships urged governments to partner with telecom industries to collaborate with the ministries of education and energy, NGOs, educational institutes, and teachers to identify local requirements to reduce the digital divide. The National Education Policy 2020 believes in the realization of the self, development of values, and the creative potential of each individual. Inclusiveness, emphasis on traditional practices, but with a more scientific temper. The pandemic requires more research on infectious diseases management, vaccines, and the resultant social issues. They need more multidisciplinary learning. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. Thank you, Dr. Karmakar, once again. I now call upon our Vice President, Mrs. Gomati Venkateshwar, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. On behalf of the President, Dr. Ranjana Banerjee, and board members of the Indian Federation of University Women's Association, it is my proud privilege to propose the formal vote of thanks. Giving me this opportunity. We have come to the conclusion of an engrossing and an awareness building discussion for participants attending from different parts of our country. Dr. Vibhuti Patel's exposition was indeed brilliant, and her informative discussion was a learning experience for all of us. Dr. Mukta Karmakar, whose impressive profile and achievement and the way she carried this moderation has opened up our consciousness to the most crucial task at hand of bringing about the long sought gender equity needed in our society, starting at the basic foundation of human society, in and through education. That human rights are also women's rights has occupied the forefront of conferences and world forums. The momentum for this has come about and gathered enough strength, and finally, the Government of India has broken the barrier of this new education policy to highlight the need for quality and for equity in school and higher education. It is heartening to learn from all of us that the implementations of strong policies of change has to be in the hands of educated women. Heartfelt thanks go out to our two resource persons of today's event. I take this opportunity to thank IFUA under the stewardship of President and her team to have all juncture. We take back home meaningful, and change the stereotypical stagnant systems. I thank Shweta Talwar, member from Dehradun, for her able conduction of the program, and to Purabhi Mohan Ghosh from the Women Graduates Union of Bombay for the perfect technical support. Last but not least, to members and the guests who have participated to make it a successful event. Good night and stay safe.
Before we formally close down, my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Patel and Dr. Karmakar for this wonderful and excellent deliberations. It has really given us a lot of insight into those areas which we may not generally look into. Thank you so much and good night.
Good night. Thanks a lot for the
Thank you
opportunity.
so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Thank
Night.
you.
It
Thank
was
you.
really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was
Lovely.
really enriching. Yes.
Thank you so much and bye everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you
Bye.
very
Thank you.
much.
Bye,
Bye.
Bye.
All.
Yeah.
Nice
Thank
seeing
you for
you
the
all.
opportunity and choosing
Thank
this
you
topic.
everybody
Yeah, very important.
for such a nice discussion.
Correct.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Purabhi, you must make her our member, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Teju is over here.
Yeah.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent deliberation.
Yeah. I also found it very
Excellent
interesting.
it was. Dr. Patel, it was really lovely.
Yeah.
I would
and
like
even
to
the-
work with you
yeah,
to
yeah.
take it forward.
And even the questions were very good. All of them were
So
so
mo-
apt and very.
You know, people got engrossed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. 90 minutes we
I
spent.
think IFU
Dr.
Bombay
Karmakar
needs to have-
also
She was
very,
very
very well toned questions.
Very told. And we were in the
Yes.
same wavelength, so it also went off.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, correct. That's
Thank you
very
so much.
important. Yeah.
And
Thank
I
you.
think we need to really act, get together and become sort of activists in this area.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Malti, I appreciate your views.
Yeah.
Yes,
very,
you know,
very important.
we realize
Correct.
because I remember when I had to send my daughter abroad after 12th standard, I was the one who told my husband, no, let her be in India, let her go for a postgrad and let her not go now, you know. So homes, parents have a lot of,
Yeah.
Yes,
Concern.
family has a
Okay.
lot of contribution.
yes.
Family has a very important contribution to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks,
the
Dr. Patel.
opportunity.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Dr.
Thank
Kumar.
you. Thank you. Yeah. So now people are leaving. Okay.
Shweta, I think we can leave.
Yeah. We can.
Yes, I
Can we
think so.
leave?
Yes, we'll leave.
Yeah. Can we?
Okay, thanks.
We'll all
Thanks,
just-
Shweta.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
We
you.
close the meeting.
Yeah.
We close
So,
the meeting now. Thank you so much. Thank
Are
you.
you teacher, Dr. Shweta? Are you?
No, I'm a social activist.
Which
So
organization?
that is why the patriarchy was
Yeah,
really, that is
yeah.
something which really needs to be dealt with, you know.
Correct. So where do you work? Where are you?
I'm based in Dehradun. I'm born and brought up in Dehradun, but of course I travel all over.
We have lived there in Jodhpur Park. My father was in ONGC.
Oh, how nice.
We could see Masuri from our
Oh,
garden.
really? From which place? Where were you? You were saying?
Jodhpur, what is it called? Rajpur Road. No?
Rajpur.